Here's an interesting question for everyone. What thoughts come to mind when you see, or even hear the words, "for your protection"?
Isn't it a cautionary term that means that you need to be aware of something?
Sometimes it's meant as a warning not to do something.
Or, it means that something has already taken place, that had the safety of the public in mind when it was initiated.
Well, here's an interesting little tidbit of information that I read that actually rings very true. And let's have a little discussion about it. For your protection, or any variation of those words, rank among the most dangerous words that the American population could ever hear coming out of their government, and not just the federal government, but even state and local government as well. Those words are merely a camouflage term for, they are going to make yet another unwarranted intrusion into your lives, or they are going to regulate or remove existing freedoms, and place even more totalitarian restrictions upon the populace. But they learned a long time ago that using those particular cover words will for the most part lessen, or even stop, overall public dissent. What do all of you think about that?
That's actually a true statement. Those three words do possess the almost unstoppable power to totally transform and destroy any nation. And that is exactly what those three words were, and are continuing to be used for, by those who actually control America's government in their never-ending quest to ever so gradually transform America into a complete totalitarian state.
Yes. And when you look back on it, "for your protection," were the initial cover words used by the anti-America left, when they began their never-ending assault on the Second Amendment to the Constitution of the United States. That particular amendment is by far the most hated by the leftists of all the original rights of the American citizens listed and guaranteed in the Constitution. And it is hated by them for the exact same reason it was created, which was to guarantee Americans a last line of defense against their own government, because the founders of America knew that all governments can very easily become corrupt and oppressive, and they had just fought and won freedom for this nation from a corrupt and oppressive government. So to protect Americans from what they knew would more than likely occur in the future, they created the Second Amendment.
And it should also be noted, the founders knew that particular protection for the citizens of their newly formed country was so very important for a people to be able to remain a free people, that they made that amendment a very simple and standalone amendment.
That is most definitely correct. And being that way, it created a major problem for the leftists, who desperately want this nation totally disarmed. However, never being able to gain a majority control of enough state legislatures at the same time in order to be able to repeal that protective safeguard for the American people, the left found a way to at least severely limit it. They came up with the idea of restrictions, which although would not eliminate that amendment, they could be used to severely hinder it. Thus "for your protection" became the most useful tool ever for the left. Firmly establishing it on the local and state level governments, they began to restrict the purchase, use, and even overall possession of firearms. For your protection, you will no longer be able to carry a firearm in public unless you acquire a permit to do so. Permits, however, will be issued at the discretion of the local and state governments, and will be subject to their personal guidelines set up for the acquisition of those permits. The public has always grumbled about it, but as always they went along with it. They went along with it to the point where it actually became an acceptable policy.
And we mustn't forget that as states began to relinquish their state rights to the now banker-controlled central government, in exchange for loans and grants from the central government to those states, the federal government began to assume more and more of government's self-proclaimed rights to regulate the populace where firearms were concerned. And soon enough established the idea of national background checks on individuals who wished to purchase firearms. And in reality it was not just to have national control over who may or may not be a potential threat to others via possession of those arms, but to add to its already established massive and ever-increasing database of American citizens. And as you already said, the American public has always grumbled about it, but went along with all of it.
But it wasn't only the stripping of Americans' rights to firearms that was so successfully attacked using protection as a camouflage for the true intent of the actions. Because that camouflage works so brutally successfully, "for your protection" became the complete cover-all term for all actions by the privately owned and controlled central and even state and local governments. For your protection, you are prohibited from doing this. For your protection, you are prohibited from doing that. For your protection, you must get a permit for this or that, etc., etc.
And don't forget that it was also by using those three words as camouflage, the actual owners of America's government were able to set up massive and overreaching bureaucracies. By far the most damaging of which was the EPA, which was primarily set up to actually strangle American business, and vastly increase the unemployment rate and thus the poverty level of American citizens. America's owners used the Republican side of their political party to establish that bureaucracy under the guise of protecting the environment, because at that time the public was more inclined to accept such a stranglehold on America, if it came from that side of the owners' political party. Once established, they used the Democrats' side of their party to quickly and vastly increase its power and stranglehold on America. Now, that singular agency has become solely responsible for the collapse of literally thousands of American businesses, the fleeing of this country in order to survive by many other businesses, restrictions and prohibitions for land and homeowners and individuals alike, as well as a good percentage of the unemployment rate in America.
For your protection has always been the magic key that opened the door for increased government control on any and all levels of government. But it was over the past half-century and especially over the past 15 years that those magic words were used to drastically push America in the desired direction of its actual financial owners, and that is to transform this once bright and beautiful free country into a complete and dark totalitarian ruled land. Immediately after the brutal slaughter of thousands of innocent Americans on September 11, 2001, the Republican side of the party was again used to initially set up yet another major push toward totalitarianism. This time armed totalitarianism. President George W. Bush within only hours of that attack announced to the nation the creation of the Department of Homeland Security, and again it was told to the American people that it was for your protection. And very strangely, that brand new and extremely well-armed department was up and running nationwide in almost no time at all. Hundreds of times faster than any other governmental project was ever up and running after the announcement of its pending creation. It was almost as if that entire project had been in the planning and preparation stage for literally months, if not years, prior to 9/11. That new department also instantly became the American Gestapo, with the very same authority over not only the American people themselves, but over all other branches of government as well. The very same authority that the German Gestapo had in Nazi Germany.
Exactly. And they got away with setting up this new nationwide military branch because they did not classify it as a military branch, even though it is equally as well armed. Names are very important when it comes to pulling the wool over the eyes of the American sheeple. To label it as the military branch that it actually is would have been a direct violation of the Constitution that America's owners are still having to work around. Instead they labeled it a security force and regarded it as a national police force. The public accepted the lie because it wanted to believe it, especially since it was introduced immediately after 9/11.
And people should not forget that not too long after the establishment of the DHS, and again, for your protection, the Patriot Act was announced and passed by the owner's puppet government and signed into law by Bush. An act that set aside the constitutional rights of the American people and was explained by the owner's government that it was necessary because it was for your protection, and as to be expected, the American people grumbled and went along with it. Then, as quietly as could be done, Bush Jr. increased the powers of the president and the government in general under the NDAA, which was originally meant to be for sustaining the American military.
And as we all have seen, it was to get rapidly even worse for America. Because then came 2008 and the placing of the most totally inexperienced, totally unqualified, totally incompetent person ever in the entire history of America into control of the executive branch of the government, a complete misfit that is so brutally incompetent that the only thing he is qualified to do is play golf, which he does most of the time when he is not vacationing or partying with anti-America Hollywood leftists. But he was the perfect choice for America's financial owners because he would do whatever they told him to do without questioning it. All that he wanted really was to party, golf, vacation, and most importantly, to feel important and above the American people, and all of which they let him do. Out of his totally unqualified administration, which possesses all the knowledge and ability of an elementary school student government, came the drastic increase of power to the owner's government, through the NDAA, which then stripped the American people of even more rights. Along with that came a massive increase in the size and scope of the NSA, which has now transformed this nation into the Big Brother existence warned about by H.G. Wells in the book titled 1984. And again it was told to the American people that it was for your protection, that all Americans are now subject to arrest without charge, as well as indefinite confinement without a trial, or even legal representation. In addition to the government now being able, and at their own discretion, to label any group or individual a potential terrorist merely because someone served their nation in the military, or made public or written statements the government found to be offensive toward the government, in addition to allowing the police to do warrantless searches and seizure of property, and warrantless wiretaps, and a host of other totalitarian powers. And as always the American people grumbled and went along with all of it, because the government they now actually fear has said that it is all being done for your protection. In the private sector the words "for your protection" actually mean that something has been set up and should be adhered to because it is actually for the safety of the public in general. But where the government is now concerned, whenever the words "for your protection" are seen, or heard, or for that matter even implied, it means that the people have lost, or are about to lose even more freedoms, even though there are so very few left to actually lose before this nation, that was founded for us as the last and best hope for all mankind, is officially declared over and done with.